Welcome back to the Foundry by Forge College. I'm super excited to have you here today for this explainer. Now, in our last session on scalability and operational assessment, we really dug deep into the raw math. But today is all about Capstone Mining Strategy Report. We're drawing up the ultimate engineering blueprint, laying it out like a clean, minimalist patent schematic. We're taking all those scattered pieces of your Bitcoin mining knowledge, the hardware specs, the energy models, the regulatory red tape, and we're snapping them all together into a single, cohesive, stakeholder-ready master plan. Grab your notes, because we are about to turn theory into some serious, actionable strategy.
Here's the agenda for our drafting session today. We're going to start off with the master blueprint, then crunch the hardware and energy models, figure out how to navigate regulatory roadblocks, look into future-proofing your strategy, and finally wrap up with delivering the final report.
All right, Section 1, the master blueprint. Let's look at the overarching schematic for this capstone and see how everything connects.
So, we're basically taking the raw material and lifecycle data from our previous assessment, that's step 1, and assembling it all into a definitive decision-making document in step 2. You've already got the ingredients right. You've got a regulatory compliance matrix, you've got performance metrics for things like immersion cooling, and you've built a working energy consumption model. The goal here isn't to relearn that math, it's to integrate it. We're taking those isolated spreadsheets and weaving them into a coherent narrative. Because, let's be real, a brilliant technical model is practically useless if you can't present it clearly to the stakeholders who are actually writing the checks. Moving right along to Section 2, hardware and energy models. Time to spec out the hardware and run the actual numbers to see what it takes to power our factory floor. Your blueprint absolutely has to contrast at least 2 distinct hardware philosophies. Take a look at the efficiency cluster, for example. It's incredibly lean, running at 30 watts per terahash, but the capital expenditure is a hefty $2.5 million. It's basically the sports car of mining rigs. Now, flip that around, and you have a cost-focused mixed fleet. This pushes more nominal hash rate at 120,000 terahashes, and it's definitely cheaper up front at $1.8 million. But there's a catch. It's an energy hog at 45 watts per terahash and has a much shorter lifespan. Your strategy report needs to lay these numbers out super clearly so you can decide which path actually makes sense for your capital. But wait, you can't just calculate the power drawn by the mining chips themselves. To accurately model your total energy footprint, you absolutely have to factor in the PUE, or power usage effectiveness. I kind of like to think of this as the electricity tax. It's the overhead energy cost of keeping the factory lights on, running the networking gear, and most importantly, powering the massive cooling systems so your incredibly expensive mining machines don't just melt into a tragic, useless puddle of silicon. Seriously, if your mining rigs use 1 megawatt, but your cooling systems use an extra 0.15 megawatts, your PUE is 1.15. If you forget to include PUE in your model, your profitability projections are going to be completely detached from reality. Next up, your Python script or spreadsheet model needs to project energy consumption and operational costs across some very specific time frames, 1, 3, and 5-year planning horizons. Now, why these specific numbers? Well, the Bitcoin network changes incredibly fast, but capital depreciation moves pretty slow. Year 1 is really all about immediate operational cash flow. Year 3, that's usually when you have to start thinking about hardware recycles. And Year 5 is your long-term strategic horizon to prove the facility's overall viability. We also have to prep for the unpredictable real world. Do not forget to stress test your mathematical model by factoring in a 20% swing in equipment efficiency. Remember, the numbers on a manufacturer's spec sheet are tested in a pristine, climate-controlled laboratory. Your actual machines? They're going to be sitting out in a dusty warehouse in Texas or freezing up in Iceland. Filters clog up, thermal paste degrades, silicon ages. If your strategy completely falls apart and goes bankrupt just because your machines run 20% less efficiently than advertised, well, you don't really have a resilient strategy. You just have a gamble. Okay, Section 3, navigating regulatory roadblocks. Because even the most brilliant engineering blueprint needs some deflector shields. The absolutely crucial point here is that simply identifying a risk isn't enough. You've got to explicitly map it to a solution. We're looking at risks like permitting delays, nasty tax surprises, and strict emissions reporting. Now, if you just list these out in your report, your stakeholders are going to panic. You have to connect them directly to actionable mitigations. For instance, if there's a risk of a 6-month permitting delay, your mitigation is holding 6 months of buffer capital in escrow. Emissions risk? Your mitigation is alternative site selection with pre-approved renewable grid interconnects. Anticipating the roadblock and actually building the bypass is exactly what separates amateur operators from true professionals. Let's move on to Section 4, future-proofing your strategy. We need to make sure this master plan can survive a harsh impact with reality. To do that, your report has to evaluate these 3 highly plausible future trend scenarios. First, efficiency-led. What happens if next-generation hardware suddenly makes your current fleet obsolete overnight? Second, regulatory tightening. What if a new local law suddenly taxes your energy usage into the ground? And third, energy price volatility. What if global events caused your cheap electricity rates to literally triple? You have to explain exactly how your hardware choices and site selection would pivot in each of these situations. Your model needs to be flexible enough to answer these what-ifs questions instantly when a stakeholder inevitably brings them up during a pitch. After all that complex analysis, everything gets distilled down into a sleek, one-page executive summary. Like any great pitch, nobody wants to sift through 50 pages of raw data just to find your main point. Your summary must clearly state a conditional recommendation. It should sound a little something like this. We recommend purchasing the cost-focused mixed fleet, provided energy prices remain below 4 cents per kilowatt hour. However, if the regulatory tightening scenario occurs, we pivot immediately to the high-efficiency cluster. See? It's clear, it's decisive, and most importantly, it's backed by rock-solid data. And finally, Section 5, delivering the final report. Because getting the math right is only half the battle. Presenting it cleanly is the mark of a pro. Your final submission bundle isn't just a simple text document. It absolutely must include your written report PDF, along with these specific code and data files, your Python model, your hardware specs in a CSV, your scenarios, and your final outputs. Why all the extras? Because trust is good, but verification is way better. Reviewers and stakeholders need to be able to reproduce your numbers on their own machines. If they tweak a single variable in your scenarios file and run your Python script, they should be able to see exactly how your strategy adapts in real time. And that brings us to the golden rule of this entire blueprint. Absolutely no orphan numbers. So what's an orphan number? It's a statistic or a cost claim sitting right there in your PDF that has no parent. It's just tragically wandering around your document without tracing back to any actual formula in your Python model or a cell in your CSV. If you claim that maintenance will cost $50,000 a year, that number better be generated by an explicit formula in your code. Orphan numbers will destroy your credibility instantly, so please, make sure every single claim is tied directly to a reproducible output. So, you've built a rock-solid reproducible strategy based on energy, hardware, and regulations. But there's still a massive variable we haven't touched yet, which brings us to our final provocative question. How will protocol-level changes, like block weight and transaction fees, completely rewrite your revenue modeling? Well, that is exactly what we're going to tackle in our next lesson on segregated witness. Once you've drafted your strategy report and made totally sure there are no orphan numbers running around, head over to forge.college. There, you can explore our other Web3 topics, jump into our amazing community, and discover how the internal mechanics of the Bitcoin protocol itself will change the very foundation of the strategy you just built. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep building those blueprints, and I'll see you in the next one.